Hello, friends. Tonight we begin a journey through pages never printed and memories long since swept away. For some stories are not told, but tucked into riverbanks, folded into raindrops, or hidden beneath the rippling surface of dreams. Let the current carry you now as we drift into our first tale. A Library Beneath the River, Part 1, The River's Secret. The town of Glenvale was the kind of place you passed through with your breath held, one road in, one road out, and the rush of water always in your ears. It had no gates, no guards, and no clock tower. Only shutters that creaked in the wind and stones warmed from the sun. The people were quiet folk, quick to nod, slow to speak, and always respectful of the river they called Marrowflow. Not because it nourished them, but because it remembered them. Maeve had lived on the outer bank of Glenvale for nearly a decade, in a crooked little house whose foundation had sunk just enough to make her bookshelves tilt ever so slightly. She was not born in the town, but no one seemed to mind. She arrived one autumn afternoon, rain in her coat and ink on her hands, and settled herself right in. The house looked as though it had been gently placed down by accident and then forgotten. It was nestled in a bend of the river where the reeds grew tallest and frogs held long, polite conversations at dusk. Its stone walls were covered in soft green moss, and the roof sagged slightly in the middle, giving it the look of someone perpetually shrugging. Wisteria curled along the porch beams, pale and wispy, and a tin wind chime above the door made the softest tink, 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 whenever the breeze nudged it just so. The front garden was a clutter of wild herbs and crooked stepping stones, with little wooden markers stuck into the soil like sleepy flags. The river ran just beyond the back gate, close enough that Maeve could hear it gurgling to itself at night, like a very old friend dozing in an armchair. The fence was low, more suggestion than barrier, and the grass had always seemed a little damp, no matter the weather. Some days, the mist rolled in thick as cream and blanketed the whole bend. On those mornings, her house would vanish from the road entirely, just a chimney puffing quietly above a sea of fog. It was the kind of place where stories liked to settle, and Maeve never minded the company. Old folk came to her with water-stained field journals. Children brought her fragments of bedtime tales they'd half remembered. Once, someone gave her a ledger that was just filled with the word sorry written hundreds of times. She copied them all. Maeve spoke little, listened well, and lived in a state of quiet contentment. She had her teapot, her lined paper, and one chair that didn't wobble, and the soft, steady voice of the river outside her window. It was enough. Until the book appeared. It came after a week of heavy rain. The river swelled past its usual border, licking at the stones near her doorstep and leaving behind odd flotsam, pebbles stacked in random piles, reeds bent and broken, and once a single boot filled with marigolds. And then one morning, Maeve opened her garden gate and found it. A book, waterlogged, modded blue and silver with no title on the spine. Its cover was rough like dried kelp, and cold to the touch, colder than it should have been in the early spring sun. She brought it inside without thinking. She had a towel ready in moments, laying the book out near the hearth, careful fingers easing open the stiff, damp pages one by one. The script inside was unfamiliar. Not quite runes, not quite cursive. The letters looked as if they had been drawn by the current of a stream, looping, flowing, changing mid-line. Maeve furrowed her brow. She flipped ahead, 10 pages, 20, 30. No illustrations, no headings, just the same fluid script. She didn't recognize the language, and that should have been the end of it. But that night, she dreamt. The dream, she was underwater, not drowning, just drifting. The world around her shimmered in soft blues and greens. Beams of light filtered down through a ceiling of gently rippling surface. There was no pressure on her chest, no panic in her limbs. Only silence and the sound of pages turning in the distance. She floated toward the sound, arms outstretched. Its source revealed itself slowly. A great building of stone and glass resting down on the riverbed, so vast it stretched into the shadows. Tall windows and arching doorways which stood half open. They looked tall enough to let the moon swim through. No handles, no locks. Just the gentle sense that if you wished to enter, you already belonged. Maeve drifted toward the doors, arms moving slowly through the water, hair fanning out behind her like strands of ink. As she passed beneath the first arch, the river quieted, as though holding its breath. The sensation of crossing the threshold was strange. Not cold, not wet, just still. The way the air feels in a chapel, sacred but not solemn. She stepped forward, and her feet, bare now, touched stone, smooth as polished marble, cool against her soles. The water parted from her like mist from a lantern flame, leaving her weightless but dry. She stood in a vast hall, surrounded by silence so thick she could feel it, and inside, shelves, hundreds, thousands, stretching up and around and inward in every direction. Some rooted in the floor like trees, others spiraled up to the ceiling and on beyond it, vanishing into the blue-lit mist. Books swam through the water in slow, graceful arcs, some glowing faintly, others wrapped in ribbon or sealed with wax. A few pulsed with gentle sound, soft music, whispered poetry, the rustle of turning pages without hands. She passed a cluster of tiny tomes fluttering like butterflies. One brushed her cheek and left a word behind. Maeve floated deeper into the library. There was no sense of gravity, only drifting. It was as if her thoughts were pulling her forward more than her body. Up ahead, the great display case of woven glass opened like a flower, and inside it floated a single book. It hovered in place, unmoving. No label, no category, just a thick volume bound in silver thread with a mirrored cover that shimmered like a frozen pond. She paused. In the reflection, she saw herself, not as she looked now, but as a child, curled beneath a blanket, listening to stories told by someone long gone. Her breath caught. She reached out toward it. Her fingers brushed it, and she woke up gasping in her bedsheets tangled like seaweed. Maeve sat up slowly, head buzzing. She rubbed her arms and froze. Words? Wet, shimmering words, like ink drawn in condensation, were scrawled across her forearm. They disappeared a moment later, fading into warmth, leaving behind only a faint tingle and a question she couldn't ignore. She looked at the waterlogged book still drying near the fire. Something stirred in her chest. Not fear, not even curiosity. Recognition. By midday, she found herself standing by the river. The rain had stopped, but the marrow flow still moved strangely, slow and thick as honey. It lapped at her boots without soaking them, as if deciding whether she belonged. She knelt by the bank, brushing her fingers through the cold water. "I know you," she whispered. The wind caught her hair. Reeds rustled behind her. A low vibration hummed up through the earth. Not a sound exactly, but a feeling. Like it was the river that was humming. As if it wanted to speak, but had no mouth to do so. Maeve stood and turned toward the old ferry dock in town. The ferryman was there, of course. Everyone in Glenville knew Kellen. He worked the river for as long as anyone could remember, though no one knew where he came from. He was tall, lean, and moved like a cat that had never known hurry. His eyes were the color of fog. And he did not speak. Not because he couldn't, but because the river had taken his voice. That was the story, anyway. Maeve raised a hand in greeting. Kellen nodded once, quietly mooring his boat with a rope that had more knots than sense. "I need to go downriver," she said softly, "to the place the songs talk about, where the old steps are." Kellen looked at her a long time, and he gestured for her to climb aboard. The boat rocked gently beneath her feet. They moved in silence, save for the creak of wood and the soft dip of oars in the water. The trees along the banks leaned in like nosy neighbors, branches dangling close to the surface. Fog began to gather, though the sun had not set. As they rounded a bend, Maeve saw it. Stone steps, slick with moss, descending from a weathered arch half submerged in the current. The remains of an old structure, perhaps, a forgotten pier, or something older. The river deepened here. The air grew colder. Kellen slowed the boat, letting it drift. Maeve stood. And she heard it. Something was calling to her. Not a voice, not words, but a rhythm. A pulse, like a heartbeat matching her own. She stepped to the edge of the boat, boots pressing into the wood. Her reflection in the water shimmered eyes wide, hair floating as if it already was submerged. "Helen," she said, not turning, "if I don't come back, write my story down, would you?" Helen didn't answer. He couldn't. Maeve took a breath and stepped into the river. To be continued. Look for The Library Beneath the River, Part 2.